So this is the last class this year. We have Christmas and New Year's and lots of celebrations. And of course the next year then we will begin. I'll take the last paragraph just as for the continuity. Page 166, the process of avatarhood, the previous chapter, the last paragraph. There the Gita's doctrine of avatarhood stands from there. End of page 166. Okay. There the Gita's doctrine of avatarhood stands. We have had to advert to it at length in this aspect of its method, as we did to the question of its possibility, because it is necessary to look at it and face the difficulties which the reasoning mind of man is likely to offer to it. It is true that the physical avatarhood does not fill a large space in the Gita, but still it does occupy a definite place in the chain of its teachings and is implied in the whole scheme. The very framework being the avatar leading the Vibhuti, the man who has risen to the greatest heights of mere manhood, to the divine birth and divine works. No doubt, too, the inner descent of the Godhead to raise the human soul into himself is the main thing. It is the inner Christ, Krishna or Buddha that matters. But just as the outer life is of immense importance for the inner development, please note that, but just as the outer life is of immense importance for the inner development, so the external avatarhood is of no mean importance for this great spiritual manifestation. The consummation in the mental and physical symbol assists the growth of the inner reality. So the consummation in the mental and physical symbol of the avatar assists the growth of the inner reality. Afterwards, the inner reality expresses itself with greater power in a more perfect symbolization of itself through the outer life. So this is also the importance of why the outer life is of such importance. Those in the older yogas, renunciation of life, giving up of sanskaric, work and life, going to the mountains, going into sannyasa. It does amputate and, the fullness of the divine manifestation. In the same way, while you might have, the mother says, the piano is very varied and very rich, unlike other instruments. Now there are other instruments that are beautiful, but they have there's a certain smallness of breadth in them. So in the same way, if your outer life is full, is rich, and is full of different possibilities, then your mind, your body, your vital being has a chance to get refined on the touchstone of life. And that is a very tough one. Now those who give up the outer life and go into monkhood or sannyasa or whatever may have an extreme one line of movement towards a particular direction, but they do miss out on the full and perfect symbolization and fullness of spiritual manifestation. So this is important, especially as the Gita is a prelude to Sri Aurobindo's own yoga philosophy, which he develops later in the Synthesis of Yoga. And these words are reminiscent of the importance and symbolism of the outer life. And therefore the next chapters you will see divine work, outer works, divine work that the avatar does, and so on. The consummation in the mental and physical symbol assists the growth of the inner reality. Afterwards, the inner reality expresses itself with greater power in a more perfect symbolization of itself through the outer life. Between these two, spiritual reality and mental and physical expression, acting and returning upon each other constantly, the manifestation of the divine in humanity has elected to move always in the cycles of its concealment and its revelation. And therefore, when you have the full manifestation, what is most important, as the Isha Upanishad says, that one has to aspire to live 100 years. Age is very important because it takes much longer, because you have to, integrate every aspect of the mind, the vital, the physical, the inner consciousness, the outer consciousness, and that takes time. So 100 years is what is the minimum required. And for that you have to have perfect health. And for perfect health, what do you need?
Perfect attitude.
So, for perfect health, you require equanimity and conscious and
perfect mindset and self-reflection.
Yeah, and consciousness, to be conscious of every movement, so that you can remove it, and there is no suppression, and there is no repression, and so on. Okay, so we come to the next chapter, chapter 17, the divine birth and divine works. The work for which the avatar descends has, like his birth, a double sense and a double form. It has an outward side of the divine force acting upon the external world in order to maintain there and to reshape the divine law by which the Godward effort of humanity is kept from decisive retrogression and instead decisively carried forward in spite of the rule of action and reaction, the rhythm of advance and relapse by which nature proceeds. So the work for which the avatar descends has, like his birth, a double sense and a double form. It has the outward side of the divine force acting upon the external world to maintain and reshape the divine law. And this maintenance and reshapement of the divine law, by which the Godward effort of humanity is kept from decisive retrogression. Otherwise, humanity or humankind would tend to regress rather than progress. So to maintain the line of progression of humanity, this is the very, very important point. That is why the avatar descends. Otherwise there will be a regression, because humanity on its own cannot, it needs a spur, needs the divine descent, needs the divine example, needs the divine force and the manifestation of or the bringing down of a new force each time for it to go forward. Okay? So, this is the work for which the avatar descends. Okay? It's not just for the sake of it descending. It is to reshape the divine law by which the Godward effort of humanity is kept from decisive retrogression, going backwards, and instead decisively carried forward goes progression, in spite of the rule of action, in spite of the karmic action and reaction. Yeah, your actions have a particular reaction, the karmic bond, in spite of that. So we continue. Yes. It has an inward side, decisive, the rhythm of advance and relapse by which nature proceeds. It has an inward side. So this is the outward side to it. And what is the inward side of the divine's work and manifestation? It has an inward side of the divine force of the Godward consciousness, acting upon the soul of the individual and the soul of the race, so that it may receive new forms of revelation of the divine in man, new forms of revelation of the divine in man, and may be sustained, renewed, and enriched in its power of upward self-unfolding. Okay. The outward and inward side of the divine work when he descends, why he descends. So outward is very clear. It's a rhythm of it. He is able to stop the rhythm of advance and relapse, and in a sense does not allow humanity to go into a decisive retrogression and pushes it forward. The inner side, this force of the Godward consciousness that acts upon the soul of the individual, but also the soul of the collective, of the whole of the race of humanity, so that it may receive new forms of revelation of the divine in man, and may be sustained, renewed, and enriched in its power of upward self-unfolding. The avatar does not descend merely for a great outward action, as the pragmatic sense in humanity is too often tempted to suppose. This is very important because we think that Ravan came because there was Ram, Yasura. Shri Krishna came because of, uh, Kans, and also later Duryodhana and the whole core of evil that had gone into So these are also part of it, and but this is very important that this is not merely for a great outward action. This is important. So what it does is far greater. Can you imagine that if there was no avatar, there would be a retrogression of the collective race of humanity? Now, how important is that? Even to understand that rationally, the entire race would be in retrogression, and the inner soul of the collective race and of the collective man would otherwise not get that impetus towards forward progression. So that is the real thing. Of course, the outer work is also there, but it's not the main thing. The avatar does not descend merely for a great outward action, as the pragmatic sense in humanity is too often tempted to suppose. So if Sri Krishna did not descend to make sure that the Pandavas won the war and the Kauravas were defeated, neither did Sri Rama descend because of the Ravan and the whole Asuric movement. So the avatar does not descend merely for a great outward action, as so and so. Action and event have no value in themselves, but only take their value from the force which they represent and the idea which they symbolize, and which the force is there to serve. The crisis in which the avatar appears, though apparent to the outward eye only, the crisis in which the avatar appears, though apparent to the outward eye only, as a crisis of events and great material changes, is always in its source and real meaning a crisis in the consciousness of humanity, when it has to undergo some grand modification and effect some new development. So, though the crisis seems to be one that is a crisis of events and material changes, the real crisis is some real meaning is a crisis in the consciousness of humanity, where it has to undergo some grand modification and effect some new development. Can anyone guess what that could be at the time of Sri Krishna and the Mahabharata? What would be the new, the grand modification and the new development?
Uh,
That
perhaps
whole crisis in the consciousness of humanity? Sorry?
perhaps from I mean, it looks like as if there are two levels to it. One is that Sri Krishna brings in a breaking of rules and the narrow meaning of morality and dharma. He widens that to, but the main thing is to shift the consciousness towards the inner divine and to follow that dharma, to
Mhm.
understand that. That's what comes across.
Right. Yes, because you see, the importance that Sri Krishna puts on surrender. Surrender to me. Give up, give all to me. Let me do the work. See me as a divine worker in you. It is not you who work. It is not your action. It is not your karma. It is me. It is I who am in everything. It is I who am in the opposition and in the other side. It is I who have killed everybody already. You're just doing the action. So this kind of consciousness that the Gita brings into the world, into the collective consciousness of man, is something very, very, we take it for granted today. But can you imagine thousands and thousands of years ago, 3,500 years ago? I've got the now exact date. 3,500 years ago, the Gita was, the Mahabharata took place, and Sri Krishna stood on the battlefield and said these words to Arjun. And can you imagine how they've shaped the collective consciousness of our age? And of ages and ages and ages. Today, we are all attempting to do this. So many have, and so many take it for granted. But this is where the seed thought and the seed consciousness came. And that consciousness that he gave, that power that he gave Arjun, and he gave all those that followed him and loved him deeply. So, this idea of surrender, this idea of him as the worker, is something that um, is quite remarkable, and if you really look at it, is a complete change in the upward new consciousness that has come into humanity at that time, and it takes many, many, many years, thousands of years, for it to actually see its manifestation. Okay, so for this action of, let's go back there. The crisis in which the avatar appears, though apparent to the outward eye only as a crisis of events and great material changes, is always in its source and real meaning a crisis in the consciousness of humanity, when it has to undergo some grand modification and effect some new development. For this action of change, the divine force is needed. But the force varies always according to the power of consciousness which it embodies. Hence, the necessity of a divine consciousness manifesting in the mind and soul of humanity, where indeed the change is mainly intellectual and practical. The intervention of the avatar is not needed. So, where the change of consciousness is intellectual or practical, the avatar is not required. When is the avatar required? The intervention of the avatar is not needed. There is a great uplifting of consciousness, a great manifestation of power in which men are for the time being exalted above their normal selves. And this surge of consciousness and power finds its wave crest in certain exceptional individuals, vibhutis. For that, you don't need the avatar, the vibhutis are there. For example, when the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity were first spoken of during the French Revolution, those were the vibhutis, and some of them have been named in Sri Aurobindo's conversations with his disciples. And for that, you don't need an avatar. There is a great change where there's a surge of consciousness, an exaltation of that period above their normal selves, and power finds its wave crest in certain exceptional individuals, vibhutis they're called. So whether the vibhutis of the Renaissance and the painters and the artists, or the vibhutis of the French Revolution, or the vibhutis in the Indian freedom movement, and so many other movements, there are these vibhutis who are there, exceptional individuals, vibhutis whose action, leading the general action, is sufficient for the change intended. Oh, here it is. The Reformation in Europe. So you can see I haven't read this chapter. The Reformation in Europe and the French Revolution were crises of this character. Okay, so the Reformation in Europe is a what is the Reformation? Which period is that? No, no, the Reformation period in Europe.
I think around
Uh,
century, I'm not sure, around 15th, 16th century, where the
century.
church's authority was questioned. And before that, the papal authority was the supreme. And science started coming center
Science
stage.
came. Yeah.
Protestant,
Education.
the
The
Protestant
Protestant
movement.
also, which again became a
Martin Luther.
no, no, the Renaissance I think was later. The
Renaissance
Reformation
followed upon Reformation.
followed, yeah. So the Reformation in Europe and the French Revolution were crises of this character. They were not great spiritual events, but intellectual and practical changes, one in religious, the other in social and political ideas. So obviously social political ideas was the French Revolution, and religious was the Reformation in Europe. Forms and motives. So they were not great spiritual events, but intellectual and practical changes, one in religious, the other in social and political ideas, forms and motives, and the modification of the general consciousness brought about was a mental and dynamic, but not a spiritual modification. So the general consciousness changed, but the change in the of consciousness was a mental and dynamic change and not a spiritual modification. But when the crisis has a spiritual seed or intention, then a complete or a partial manifestation of the God consciousness in a human mind and soul comes as its originator or leader. That is the avatar. So when the crisis has a spiritual seed or a spiritual intention, then a complete manifestation of the God consciousness or a partial manifestation of the God consciousness in a human mind and soul comes as its originator or leader. And that is the avatar. The outward action of the avatar is described in the Gita as the restoration of the dharma, when from age to age the dharma fades, languishes, loses force, and its opposite arises, strong and oppressive. Then the avatar comes and raises it again to power, as these things in idea are always represented by things in action and by human beings who obey their impulsion. His mission is, in its most human and outward terms, to relieve the seekers of dharma who are oppressed by the reign of the reactionary darkness, and to destroy the wrongdoers who seek to maintain the denial of the Dharma. That the language used can easily be given a poor and insufficient connotation, which would deprive avatarhood of all its spiritual depth of meaning. Dharma is a word which has an ethical and practical, natural and philosophical, and a religious and spiritual significance. And it may be used in any of these senses, exclusive of the others, in a purely ethical, a purely philosophical, or a purely religious sense. So, this outward action of the avatar is described in the Gita as the restoration of Dharma. When from age to age Dharma fades, then the avatar comes and raises it again to power. And these things in idea are always represented by things in action and by human beings who obey these impulsions of oppression and opposition. So the avatar's mission is to relieve the seekers of Dharma who are oppressed by the reign of the reactionary darkness and to destroy the wrongdoers. But, he says, the language used can easily be given an insufficient connotation and would deprive avatarhood of its spiritual depth of meaning. Because normally dharma is a word which has normally an ethical or a practical meaning, philosophical, religion, but doesn't has an ethical and practical and natural and philosophical and a religious and spiritual significance, and it may be used in any of these senses, exclusive of the others. So it could either be an ethical or a practical or a philosophical or a religious or whatever. It could be used in exclusion of the others, in a purely ethical, purely philosophical, or a purely religious sense. Ethically, it means the law of righteousness. So, dharma ethically means the law of righteousness, the moral rule of conduct, or in a still more outward and practical significance, social and political justice, or even simply the observation of the social law. If used in this sense, we shall have to understand that when uprightness, injustice, and oppression prevail, the avatar descends to deliver the good and destroy the wicked, to break down injustice and oppression, and to restore the ethical balance of mankind. Thus, the popular and mythical account of the Krishna avatar is that the unrighteousness of the Kurus, as incarnated in Duryodhan and his brothers, became so great a burden to the earth that she had to call upon God to descend and lighten her load. So, that's the popular and mythical account of the Krishna avatar. The Krishna avatar is that the unrighteousness of the Kurus, as represented in Duryodhan and his brothers, became so great a burden to the earth that she had to call upon God to descend and lighten her load. Accordingly, Vishnu, incarnated as Krishna, delivered the oppressed Pandavas and destroyed the unjust Kauravas. A similar account is given of the descent of the previous Vishnu avatars of Rama to destroy the unrighteous oppression of Ravana, of Parashuram to destroy the unrighteous license of the military and princely caste, the Kshatriyas, of the dwarf Vamana to destroy the rule of the titan Bali. Bali. How do you speak? Bali, right? So this is all the accounts, as you see, from the um, dharmic point. So the avatar descends for a dharmic reason. And these are to bring back righteousness and dharma back. And then here Sri Aurobindo talks about all the line of avatars and how they brought back. So, of the dwarf Vamana to destroy the rule of the Titan Baba. But obviously, the purely practical, ethical, or social and political mission of the avatar, which is thus thrown into popular and mythical form, does not give a right account of the phenomenon of avatarhood. So, this purely practical, ethical, social, political mission of the avatar, which has been thrown into popular and mythical form, does not give, please note, does not give a right account of the phenomenon of avatar. It does not cover its spiritual sense. And if this outward utility were all, we should have to exclude Buddha and Christ, whose mission was not at all to destroy evildoers and deliver the good, but to bring to all men a new spiritual message and a new law of divine growth and spiritual realization. On the other hand, if we give to the word dharma only its religious sense, in which it means a law of religious and spiritual life, we shall indeed get to the kernel of the matter, but we shall be in danger of excluding the most important part of the work done by the avatar. Always we see in the history of the divine incarnations the double work. And inevitably, because the avatar takes up the workings of God in human life, the way of the divine will and wisdom in the world, and that always fulfills itself externally as well as internally by inner progress in the soul and by an outer change in the life. So this double work, always we see in the history of the divine incarnations, a double work. So what is this double work? The way of the divine will and wisdom in the world, that is, inner progress in the soul and outer change in life are the double work. The avatar may descend as a great spiritual teacher and savior, the Christ, the Buddha, but always his work leads, after he has finished his earthly manifestation, to a profound and powerful change, not only in the ethical, but in the social and outward life and ideals of the race. He may, on the other hand, descend as an incarnation of the divine life, the divine personality and power in its characteristic action, for a mission ostensibly social, ethical, and political, as is represented in the story of Rama or Krishna. But always then, this descent becomes, in the soul of the race, a permanent power for the inner living and the spiritual rebirth. It is indeed curious to note that the permanent, vital, universal effect of Buddhism and Christianity has been the force of their ethical, social, and practical ideals, and their influence even on the men and the ages which have rejected their religious and spiritual beliefs, forms, and disciplines, Later, Hinduism, which rejected Buddha, his Sangha and his Dharma, bears the ineffaceable imprint, the social and ethical influence of Buddhism and its effect on the ideas and the life of the race. So he says, even it is indeed curious to note that the permanent, vital, universal effect of Buddhism and Christianity has been the force not so much of their spiritual, but of their ethical, social, and practical ideals, and their influence even on the men and ages which have rejected their religious and spiritual beliefs, forms, and disciplines. Later in Hinduism, they rejected Buddha, as we know, his Sangha and his Dharma. There's still the in, ineffaceable imprint of the social and ethical influence of Buddhism. Can you give me an example of that? The the imprint of the social and ethical influence of Buddhism. What is a clear example that Hinduism disregarded the Sangha and the Dharma, but still kept something of its ethical and social influence of Buddhism? What was it? What did Buddhism destroy? It destroyed the Varna system. It destroyed the higher caste and a lower caste, a higher man and a lower man, and so on. So that even though Buddhism got rejected uh, as a religion for India, and Hinduism was the religion we embraced because Hinduism was more embraced life rather than rejected life, which Buddhism tended to do. Yet the ineffaceable imprint of the social and ethical influence of Buddhism has never left Hinduism and never left India. The whole idea of equality, of the idea that there is charity, that there is all the things that the Sangha brought and with Buddhism brought have become a very much a part of the Hindu culture. In this Buddhism, communism.
Confucianism, even though China rejected the idea of Buddhism,
Yes.
but that Confucianism and Zen both are very much part of Buddhist thought process.
Yes.
And they are very much practiced.
Very much, yes, of course. So this is what he's trying to say. Such is the great action of the avatar that it is not something you can just, you can't compartmentalize it. It's pervasive. Sorry, the effect, yeah, and it goes on for for hundreds of years after the avatar leaves. So, okay, so let's continue. Later Buddhism, which rejected Buddha, his Sangha and his Dharma, bears the ineffaceable imprint of the social and ethical influence of Buddhism and its effect on the ideas and the life of the race. While in modern Europe, let's see what happened in modern Europe. Christian only in name. Humanitarianism is the translation into the ethical and social sphere and the aspiration to liberty, equality, and fraternity, the translation into the social and political sphere of the spiritual truths of Christianity. So even though Christianity as a religion became something that was overtaken by science, and the it was sort of uh, I don't know, not really Christian only in name. It was not practiced in the way that the Christ had brought it in. Still, what he had really brought in became a part of European life, never to leave it, which is humanitarianism. And that translated into the ethical and social sphere, and the aspiration to liberty, no slavery, was abolished. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, the translation into the social and political sphere, democracy, of the spiritual truths of Christianity. The latter, especially being effected by men who aggressively rejected the Christian religion and spiritual discipline, and by an age which in its intellectual effort of emancipation tried to get rid of Christianity as a creed. So, is that clear? The latter, which is the latter?
The latter is the translation, the aspiration to liberty, equality, fraternity, I believe.
And the translation to social, spiritual truth, yeah.
That's
So
the
this
latter.
latter was especially affected by men who aggressively rejected the Christian religion because of the Catholics being, Protestant. I think France was, France was Catholic. England became Protestant. Okay, well, all of that happened. The latter, especially being affected by men who aggressively rejected the Christian religion and spiritual discipline, and by an age which, in its intellectual effort of emancipation, because we got into the new age of, industrialization and reason from, uh, spiritual discipline by an age which, in its intellectual effort of emancipation, tried to get rid of Christianity as a creed. On the other hand, the life of Rama and Krishna belongs to the prehistoric past, which has come down only in poetry and legend, and may even be regarded as myths. But it is quite immaterial whether we regard them as myths or historical facts, because their permanent truths and value lie in their persistence as a spiritual form, presence, influence in the inner consciousness of the race and the life of the human soul. So, the life of Rama and Krishna, whether some say they're myths, mythological, they're not true, didn't happen, and so on, whatever it might be, they're because they were at a prehistoric past, thousands of years ago. But their influence on the inner consciousness of the race and the life of the human soul are so deep that even till today they have completely become a part of our consciousness, collective consciousness. Okay? But it is quite immaterial whether we regard them as myths or historical facts because their permanent truth and value lie in their persistence as a spiritual form, spiritual presence, influence in the inner consciousness of the race and the life of the human soul. Avatarhood is a fact of divine life and consciousness. Avatarhood is a fact of divine life and consciousness which may realize itself in an outward action, but must persist when that action is over and has done its work in a spiritual influence. So there is a distinction between avatarhood and vibhutis or great exceptional people. Avatarhood persists in its spiritual influence long, long, long after its outer action has been done, its work has been done. So avatarhood is a fact of divine life and consciousness, which may realize itself in an outward action, but must persist when that action is over and has done its work in a spiritual influence, or may realize itself in a spiritual influence and teaching, but must then have its permanent effect, even when the new religion or discipline is exhausted in the thought, temperament, and outward life of mankind. So even when the new religion or discipline is exhausted, in the thought, temperament, and outward life of mankind, avatarhood must still have its permanent effect. He's given the example of Buddha and and Christ. We must then, in order to understand the Gita's description of the work of the avatar, we must then, in order to understand the Gita's description of the work of the avatar, take the idea of the Dharma in its fullest, deepest, and largest conception as the inner and the outer law by which the divine will and wisdom work out the spiritual evolution of mankind and its circumstances and results in the life of the race. This is very important. We must understand the Gita's description of the work of the avatar as, in a largest way, fullest, deepest, but as the inner and outer law by which the divine will and the divine wisdom work out the spiritual evolution of mankind. This is very important. Work out the spiritual evolution of mankind and its circumstances and results in the life of the race. These are the key words. Life of the race, circumstances, and results in the life of the race. Dharma, in the Indian conception, is not merely the good, the right, morality and justice, ethics. It is the whole government of all the relations of man with other beings, with nature, with God, considered from the point of view of a divine principle working itself out in forms and laws of action, forms of the inner and outer life, orderings of relations of every kind in the world. Dharma, the word meaning holding from the root dhir, to hold. Dharma is both that which we hold to and that which holds together our inner and our outer activities. So dharma is from the Sanskrit word dhir, to hold, and dharma is both that which we hold to and that which holds together our inner and outer activities. In its primary sense, it means a fundamental law of our nature, which secretly conditions all our activities. And in this sense, each being, type, species, individual, group, has its own dharma. Secondly, there is the divine nature which has to develop and manifest in us. And in this sense, dharma is the law of the inner workings by which that grows in our being. So this divine nature, the dharma is that law of the inner workings by which that divine nature, that dharma grows in our being. So secondly, there is the divine nature which has to develop in us and manifest in us. And in this sense, dharma is the law of the inner workings by which that grows in our being. Thirdly, there is the law by which we govern our outgoing thought and action and our relations with each other so as to help best both our own growth and that of the human race towards the divine ideal. So these are the three. This dharma now, in this paragraph, Sri Aurobindo explains what dharma is, because in the Gita the word dharma is used a lot when Sri Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that follow the dharma, you know, Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra, starts the whole Gita starts with that. So this is what he means by dharma, not just the outer conception, but the inner conception. And it's this government of all relations of man with other beings, with nature, with God, that is considered the divine principle working itself out. And then he says dharma is the holding together and bringing together. And then here he says of the inner and outer activities. And it is in this primary sense, it means a fundamental law of our nature, which secretly conditions all our activities. And in this sense, each being, type, individual, group, species has its own health. Secondly, there is the divine nature which has to develop. Thirdly, there is the law by which we govern our outgoing thought and actions and relations with each other, and so on. So now we will, I think, stop here. Dharma is generally spoken of as something eternal and unchanging. This is a long chapter, and it's a very interesting one because, in a sense, through this chapter, besides, of course, the wonderful exposition on the avatar and his work, and the understanding of that in our collective life and in our individual life, what Sri Aurobindo very inadvertently does, he also gives us a full view of the history and of events and ages and how each one fits into the other and what each one represents. There's a lot of historical references here. Very, very rich chapter. We shall continue this in the evening. Next time. So, any questions, thoughts, reflections, comments? Please feel free.
I'm having that. But mostly people, especially in the Western states, they don't really believe in any religion or any or from their point of view. And they're so towards deep developments. We are pushing humanity forward. Like it's one of their doing it as humans. Whereas, of course, we know we believe the divine force acts, and so I'm just wondering how, like the first paragraph was talking about how humanity is pushed towards its progress, otherwise we will not regret. And how would they, I'm just wondering how does it place out? Because in the West, it's totally negated. Yeah, negated, and they don't even believe, especially in America.
In America, they don't believe in God or in Christ or in Christian or in
They
anything.
do, but they're very at least, many of them will believe that.
But do you need them? Do you need people to believe for the work to continue?
No, but how does it? It doesn't. I'm not saying that people need to believe that but how would they take it if there was something?
They take what?
How would they accept
Accept what?
that this divine force and consciousness is working and this like this is.
They're not ready for it, so they won't have. They won't even come across it. Don't worry.
The religion mostly implements and coasts and everything. All of the developing parts. But that's where what I'm talking about is the way science is progressing and everything. But they are so towards that we are doing it.
So the question here is that for those who are online, and any of you would like to answer that, what Pooja is asking is that, she says in America and the West, there's a lot of emphasis on I am doing it, we are doing it, we are science is doing it, and basically the ego is we are the creators, we are the ones who are pushing evolution, we are the one who's progressing humanity, good works, whatever it might be. And the idea of the divine and religion or the divine force, as she says it, is not accepted or not is relegated. So, what is your question? So, how do they? How will they react if they hear this? I think that's what her question is. Yeah.
Oh, what is
So,
the question?
any answers?
What is
Sorry?
the question? What is the question?
So, how would they react if they were to read this chapter?
But I think answered it in some fashion. Like, for example, if you talk of Walt Whitman, or let's talk of Thoreau, you would find that they have taken the essence of Upanishads in it.
No, she's not talking about those. She's talking.
Or Immanuel Kant. So these are the philosophers who are actually shaping the actions of intellectual class, who
Yeah.
who also take pieces of it.
Right. So yeah. So anyway, they are all answering themselves. They're answering their own questions. Okay. Yes, yes, Robin. Yeah. You want to say something?
I'll add something here. Yes. There's been research done in the United States, here in America, and about 75% of the people here believe in the divine. It's not always organized. Some of it is very organized and very traditional, but everybody, well, a large percentage of the population does believe in the divine, and a lot of them practice it personally. And
Yes.
the idea that there is a way of life, a truth, dharma, basically, is something that most people believe in one way or another. Some very elementary and some very advanced. But if they were to read these terms, if Americans were to be presented with these terms that are foreign to them, they would not understand it. It would need to be translated into language that they would understand, but it would still make sense to most people. That's what my thoughts.
And I'd like to add to that. I think there is a great awakening happening here in this country. People are awakening spiritually now because of many reasons. In fact, I have so many American friends who want to study the Gita. They have expressly, they have expressed their view and their wish to study the Gita. And in answer to their question, there are many Indian writers, and I'm reading one such person with my American neighbor. She came to my house and she said she wanted to read the Gita, and she brought this book written by one Dr. Ravi Ravindran, who has translated and written the Gita purely for the Western reader.
Yeah.
And we are reading it together, and there are so many insights that he has addressed, not all of them, nowhere near essays on the Gita, nowhere near that, which is very profound and spiritual, but he's addressed them at the preparatory level so that the American and Western mind is prepared for this teaching before the teaching itself. And I think that is great work.
Good.
So there is consciousness of it. It's not as though they've all gone to the devil.
Also,
I couldn't agree more.
also there's a remnant of this materialistic belief that is still very prevalent in the social consciousness of what's accepted and acceptable, the scientific world, the world of medicine, that believes purely in physical reality. And that's now undergoing a revolution. It's kind of eroding from within because of the recent advances in quantum mechanics and in the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness. And so the whole structure of Darwinianism, if we can say that, it's the physical world is what's real. All of that is beginning to slowly dissolve. And it's evolving into something much more spiritual. And I think that's what people are making this transformation right now. And it'll take a while. It's not something that's going to happen quickly. People don't change their mind like that.
Yes. Good. So, any other thoughts or comments?
I think that Aurobindo wrote everything in English for that reason only.
Yes.
Because he wanted to
He used the universal
language for the world.
Yes, that's right.
And of course, his thoughts and his work is manipulated.
Yes. Good. So anyway, this is a wonderful, wonderful chapter. And I think, yes, as we are all progressing, as they say, the avatars are coming in, and they are not disappearing. And each avatar will allow the whole collective uh, consciousness and whole collective race to go towards a forward movement and not go backwards. So that is certainly happening. On this very optimistic note, I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we shall see you next year. Good night.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Year.
Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
A very warm and Happy New Year. This year is the year of the horse, the Ashwa, and it's meant to be a year of swift, rapid progress, away from the stagnation of the earlier year. And I wish you Godspeed in progress, both from in the Gita and Aurobindo. We start where we left off last time. Yeah, we can start from page 171, from the paragraph beginning. We must then, in order to understand the Gita's description of the work of the avatar, take the idea of the dharma in its fullest, deepest, and largest conception. We can start from there. So, page 171, the divine birth and divine work, starting from the paragraph. We must then, in order to understand the Gita's description of the work of the avatar, take the idea of the dharma in its fullest, deepest, and largest conception as the inner and outer law by which the divine will and wisdom work out the spiritual evolution of mankind and its circumstances and results in the life of the race. Dharma in the Indian conception is not merely the good, the right, morality and justice, ethics. It is the whole government of all the relations of man with other beings, with nature, with God. So, dharma in the Indian conception is not just morality, justice, but the whole gamut of all the relations of man with other beings, with nature, with God, considered from the point of view of a divine principle working itself out in forms and laws of action, forms of the inner and the outer life, orderings of relations of every kind in the world. Dharma, the word means holding, dharma, from the root dhir, to hold. Dharma is both that to hold up. Dharma is both that which we hold to and that which holds together our inner and outer activities. In its primary sense, it means a fundamental law of our nature which secretly conditions all our activities. This word is very important. Which secretly conditions all our activities. So it is the fundamental law of our nature, and it is that which we hold to and hold together, both our inner and our outer activities. That is what is dharma in the Indian conception of the word dharma. So this, if you notice here, um, here he is speaking of the Gita's description of the work of the avatar and the idea of dharma. So when it says all the time we are reading that one of the works of the avatar is to hold up, to protect, to hold together, to be the dharma charya, to hold the dharma of the age and to bring it back if it's been destroyed, or to create a new dharma, depending on what the avatar's mission is. So, dharma is very important to understand. It is the fundamental law of our nature which secretly conditions all our activities. And you can reflect back and ask yourself, what is your dharma? What is that which secretly conditions all your activities? That is what is dharma. Are you aware of your dharma? Are you aware of the dharma that conditions all your activities? That is important because whether we are conscious or unconscious of it, it is there. It comes from the collective, uh, you know, uh, values, collective uh, sort of the whole race. In fact, especially the Hindu religion and the Sanatan Dharma, which is very, very, very important and is secretly conditions all those who live in India and have the Indian soul, because the Sanatan Dharma is pervasive. It has certain laws that are operational collectively in the life of our race. And therefore, it comes from family to family, grandfather to father, and to generation. It's a life sap that flows through all our activities. So, in its primary sense, it means a fundamental law of our nature which secretly conditions all our activities. And in this sense, each being, type, species, individual, group has its own dharma. So not only is there a dharma of the race, there is a dharma of each species, each individual, each group, and subgroup, and uh, religion, and so on. So there are many kinds of dharmas of different types. So you have to be aware of what dharma is guiding you. Secondly, there is the divine nature which has to develop and manifest in us. And in this sense, dharma is the law of the inner workings by which that grows in our being. So, secondly, it is the divine nature which has to develop and manifest in us. And in this sense, dharma is the law of the inner workings by which that grows in our being. Thirdly, there is the law by which we govern our outgoing thought and action and our relations with each other, so as to help best both our own growth and that of the human race towards the divine ideal. So these are the three manifestations of dharma. In its primary sense, it is the fundamental law of our nature, secretly conditioning all our activities. Secondly, it is the divine nature which has to develop in each of us and manifest both in us and in the collective. And in this sense, dharma is the law of the inner workings by which that secret divine or that divine nature grows in our being. Thirdly, there is the law by which we govern our own outgoing thought and action in our relations with each other. This is the most sort of uh, well-known meaning of dharma. Most people take dharma to mean this, but the other two are equally important, if not more. Thirdly, there is the law by which we govern our outgoing thought and action and our relations with each other so as to help both our own growth and that of the human race towards the divine ideal. Dharma is generally spoken of as something eternal and unchanging, and so it is in the fundamental principle, in the ideal. But in its forms, it is continually changing and evolving. So there is the eternal principle of dharma and the changing and evolving uh, of its forms of that eternal principle. Both constitute a part of the dharmic definition. So, dharma is something eternal and unchanging in its fundamental principle, but in its forms it is continually changing and evolving, because man does not already possess the ideal or live in it, but aspires more or less perfectly towards it, is growing towards its knowledge and practice. And in this growth, dharma is all that helps us to grow into the divine purity, divine largeness, light, freedom, power, strength, joy, love, good, unity, beauty, and against it stands its shadow and denial. So, another way of understanding dharma is that dharma is all that helps us to grow into the divine purity, and largeness, and light, and freedom, power, strength, love, joy, good, unity, beauty. And against it stands its shadow and denial, which is the opposite of all this, all that resists its growth and has not undergone its law, all that has not yielded up and does not will to yield up its secret of divine values, but presents a front of perversion and contradiction, of impurity, narrowness, bondage, darkness, weakness, vileness, discord, and suffering, and division, and the hideous and the crude. All that man has to leave behind in his progress. So note the words that I used. One, the words to describe the growth of dharma and the signs of the dharmic growth, which are the divine purity, divine largeness, light, freedom, power, strength, joy, love, good, unity, beauty. And then the opposite of it, which is the opposite of beauty is hideousness and crudeness and weakness and violence and darkness and narrowness. This is the adharma, not, not dharma. So all this, all that man has to leave behind in his progress, this is the adharma, not dharma, which strives with and seeks to overcome the dharma, to draw backward and down the reactionary force which makes for evil, ignorance, and darkness. So this adharmic force tries to overcome the dharmic one and to draw back, to pull us backward, downward. It is the reactionary force which makes for evil, ignorance, and darkness. Between the two, between dharma and adharma, between the two, there is perpetual battle and struggle, oscillation of victory and defeat, in which sometimes the upward and sometimes the downward forces prevail. This has been typified in the Vedic image of the struggle between the divine and the titanic powers. So this has been typified, symbolized in the Vedic image of the struggle between the divine and the titanic powers, the sons of the light and the undivided infinity, and the children of the darkness and division. In Zoroastrian by Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, and in later religions, in the contest between God and his angels and Satan or Iblis and his demons for the possession of human life and the human soul. So this battle and struggle between the divine and titanic forces in each religion, in each culture, has been described. And the words are different, but in essence, it's always the powers of light and the forces of darkness which are in battle to gain over this human soul and to draw the human race and the human collective or the human individual down or upward. And this, of course, is described in different words. In it is these things that condition and determine the work of the avatar. In the Buddhist formula, the disciple takes refuge from all that opposes his liberation in three powers. So, so what determines the work of the avatar? It is these things that determine, that condition and deter this battle and struggle between light and darkness. And this light and darkness is also in each of us. We also hold the opposites of everything that we aspire to. There is a darkness, there is an egoism, there is a selfishness, there's a smallness, there is a certain um, uh, so there is the demon in each of us. The demon exists as much. Satan exists not only as a figure outside, but as a figure that you can recognize when you are pulled towards the smallnesses, narrownesses, greed, selfishness of your own nature. And all that helps you to grow out of it, light, beauty, unity, uh, you know, largeness of life, that is the light. So this is the very, very important principle, dharma and adharma, that also governs and is determinant of the work of the avatar. He conditions in these things, it is these things that condition and determine the work of the avatar. So now he talks about the different religions, how each approaches. In the Buddhistic formula, the disciple takes refuge from all that opposes his liberation in three paths: the Dharma, the Sangha, the Buddha. So you know Dharma. The Sangha is collective, uh, uh, the collective group that helps that of the soul to grow. Everybody, in the Buddhist, unless you have what they called is satsang in Hindi or in the Hindu religion, sangha in the Buddhist. Every religion has a certain collectivity, and the reason for the collectivity is to allow the individual soul a place to nurture its own growth. Left on its own, like a plant in a desert, in a large desert with no help, it will shrivel up and will not get the protection it requires. So, in the same way, in the Buddhistic formula, the disciple takes refuge from all that opposes his liberation in three paths: the Dharma, the Sangha, and the Buddha. So in Christianity, we have the law of Christian living, the church, and the Christ. These three are always the necessary elements of the work of the avatar. He gives a dharma, a law of self-discipline, by which to grow out of the lower into the higher life, and which necessarily includes a rule of action and of relations with our fellow men and other beings. Endeavor in the eightfold path of the law of faith, love, and purity, or any other such revelation of the nature of the divine in life. Then, because every tendency in man has its collective as well as its individual aspect, because those who follow one way are naturally drawn together into spiritual companionship and unity, he establishes the Sangha. So here is these three are also three very important elements, are necessary elements of the work of the avatar. What is the first element? Dharma. And what is dharma? The law of self-discipline, which helps us to grow from the lower into the higher. and includes the rule of action, of relations with our fellow men, the Eightfold Path, the law of faith, love, and purity, and so on. But however, man is not just a singular being. He needs a collective and lives in a collective environment and life. Therefore, then, because every tendency in man has its collective as well as its individual aspect, because those who follow one way are naturally drawn together. There's an affinity into spiritual companionship and unity. He establishes the Sangha. And what is the Sangha? The fellowship and union of those whom his personality and his teaching unite. So his personality of the avatar, and his teaching unite. So the Sangha is very important. Buddha started the Sangha, so did Christ, as the church began as an established entity from that principle of Sangha. So in Vaishnavism, there is the same trio. Now he talks about Vaishnavism. Bhagavata, Bhakta, and Bhagavan. So Bhagavat, Bhakta, and Bhagavan. The Bhagavat, which is the law of the Vaishnava dispensation of adoration and love, the Bhakta, representing the fellowship of those in whom that law is manifest, Bhagavan, the divine lover and beloved, in whose being and nature divine law of love is founded and fulfills itself. The avatar represents this third element, which is the divine personality, nature, and being, who is the soul of the Dharma and the Sangha, informs them with himself, keeps them living, and draws men towards the felicity and the liberation. In the teaching of the Gita, which is more Catholic and complex than other specialized teachings and disciplines, these things assume a larger meaning. For the unity here is the all-embracing Vedantic unity, by which the soul sees all in itself and in itself in all, and makes itself one with all beings. So the Gita, the same three principles assume a certain larger meaning because it is more Catholic in the sense of wider and more complex. And therefore, this unity which is spoken of is a unity embracing and all-embracing Vedantic unity, by which what happens, the soul sees all in itself and itself in all, and makes itself one with all beings. Identity. The Dharma is therefore the taking up of all human relations into a higher divine meaning, starting from the established ethical, social, and religious rule which binds together the whole community in which the God seeker lives. It lifts it up by informing it with the Brahmic consciousness. The law it gives is the law of oneness, of equality, of liberated, desireless, God governed action, of God knowledge and self knowledge, enlightening and drawing to itself all the nature and all the action, drawing it towards divine being and divine consciousness and of God love as the supreme power and crown of the knowledge and the action. So the Gita, the same triune principle that determines the work of the avatar, the Gita has a larger, more Catholic and complex meaning. While in Buddhism it's Dharma, Sangha, and Buddha. In Christianity it's church and the Christ, have the law of the Christian living, the church and the Christ. So the Sangha is the Christian church, and the church is the established norms and the dharmic method, and Christ. In Vaishnava, it has the Bhagavat, the Bhakta, and the Bhagavan. In the Gita, it has three principles. Now, what is the first principle? Unity is not just the unity amongst ourselves, like amongst people, between divine and the human being. This unity is an identity, is a complete identification of the soul, or in itself in all, where it sees that it is nothing but the divine self, and recognizes that divine self in everything it sees, animate, inanimate. So the divine identification, yeah. So that is the first thing, the identification. He comes as the divine part. Now that is the first. Then the soul sees all in itself and itself in all and makes itself one with all beings. Now the dharma is therefore the taking up of all human relations into a divine meaning. So the dharma is not just to stay on the human level, to have a wonderful fraternity, but also to have the human relationships, our human relationships, taken to a higher plane of a relationship of the human with the divine, taking up of all human relations into a higher divine meaning. So based or embedded or uh, you know, uh, the human relationship is pegged to the divine, to a higher divine meaning, starting from the established. It starts from this ethical, social, and religious rule, which binds together the whole community in which the God seeker lives. It lifts it up by informing it with the Brahmic consciousness. The law it gives is the law of oneness, of equality, of liberated, desireless, God governed action, of God knowledge and self knowledge, enlightening and drawing to itself all the nature and all the action, drawing it towards divine being and the divine consciousness, and of God love as a supreme power and crown of the knowledge and the action. The idea of companionship and mutual aid in God love and God seeking, which is at the basis of the idea of the Sangha or divine fellowship, is brought in when the Gita speaks of the seeking of God through love and adoration. But the real Sangha of this teaching is all humanity. The whole world is moving towards this dharma, each man according to his capacity. It is my path that men follow in every way. So the Gita's conception of the dharma is that the whole world is moving towards this this state of God love and God knowledge and uh, uh, a divine identity and a knowledge of the divine in all. So because of that, it says, it is my path that Krishna says, Sri Krishna, it is my path that men follow in every way. And the God seeker, making himself one with all, making their joy and sorrow and all their life his own, the liberated made already one self with all beings, lives in the life of humanity, lives for the one self in humanity, for God in all beings, acts for samgraha, for the maintaining of all in their dharma and the dharma. In their dharma and the dharma. For the maintenance of their growth in all its stages and in all its paths towards the divine. So this is the idea of the Sangha. While the Sangha in the Buddhist or the Christian or the Vaishnava tradition is Sangha in a prescribed format, Sangha in the Gita's philosophy and methodology comes first from an identity and an experience of the consciousness of the divine in oneself, and therefore, if one is in touch with the divine in oneself, one recognizes the divine in the other and in all others, not just in one's own sect or in one's own caste or in one's own group or in one's own church, or in one's own religion, but the divine self in all of humanity. Sarvamidam Brahman. So if the Brahman, the Brahmic consciousness then becomes the basis of the Sangha, of the collective living and the collective ideal of the race. That's why we always say that Hinduism is not a religion. It is a Sanatan Dharma. The reason this word is given, that this is the path of the Sanatan Dharma. Now you will understand that much more clearly when you see what the Gita is saying, what Sri Krishna is saying, that every path that you follow, all paths come to me. All paths are mine. All paths lead towards me. What a great liberating freedom. So it gives a certain universality. It gives a certain impersonality and something that exceeds all limits and does not put you one against the other, me against you. Religious wars. Where were the greatest religious wars taking place if you look at history? You will see it in those religions that had a certain exclusivity, that this is the only way. It's either my way or the highway. And if you're on the highway, you will be butchered. So you better come back into my way. So this is the difference between the Gita's way and other ways. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes?
The Sanskrit phrase that encapsulates that,
Hmm.
Jiva Brahma Ekya.
Yes. Jiva Brahma Ekya, yes. So all of that, this Brahmic consciousness. So this is a wonderful, wonderful explanation. Why do we say that we don't have a religion in India? We don't have a religion. Hinduism and the Hindu way of life, the Sanatan Dharma. Now, if this is our dharmic principle that guides our life, is it not a surprise? It is no surprise that the Hindus are the most liberal, tolerant, wide human beings, because we have been taught this from the time we've been born, from our ancestors, through the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Vedas, the Gita. So if this is in the very cell of our body, in the very, in the consciousness of the race, no, it is no wonder that, we will assimilate all religions. We will assimilate all contacts, and we will try and identify and see the best in everything. That is the Sanatana Dharma. Not the Sanatana Dharma that excludes. However, one should not be weak. So, the whole world is. So, this is very interesting what Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna, and this is the importance of the avatar. Why does Sri Aurobindo spend 3 chapters on the divine birth, divine works, the mission of the avatar, and so on and so forth? He's spending a lot of time on this, the process of avatarhood, because the whole of the Gita hinges on the understanding of what is the avatar and what has Sri Krishna come to do. Why has he come into the world consciousness, and why is he standing there and giving this exposition? to Arjuna in his teaching. So we continue. Let's read this again. The idea of companionship and the mutual aid in God love and God seeking, which is the basis of the idea, the Sangha, or the divine fellowship, is brought in when the Gita speaks of the seeking of God through love and adoration. But the real Sangha of this teaching, the real Sangha, is all humanity. The whole world is moving towards this dharma. Each man according to his capacity. It is my path that men follow in every way, says Sri Krishna, and the God seeker, making himself one with all, making their joy and sorrow and all their life his own. The liberated made already one self with all beings, lives in the life of humanity, lives for the one self in humanity, for God in all beings, acts for Lok Sangha, for the maintaining of all in their dharma and the dharma, for the maintenance of their growths in all its stages and in all its paths towards the divine. For the avatar here, though he is manifest in the name and form of Krishna, lays no exclusive stress on this one form of his human birth, but on that which it represents, the divine, the Purusha, of whom all avatars are the human births, of whom all forms and names of the Godhead worshipped by men are the figures. The way declared by Krishna here is indeed announced as the way by which man can reach the real knowledge and the real liberation. But it is one that is inclusive, but it is one that is inclusive of all paths and not exclusive. For the divine takes up into his universality all avatars and all teachings and all types. Wonderful, wonderful words. So here it says that even though in the Gita, the avatar is in the Gita manifest in the form and the name of Krishna. It lays no exclusive stress. There's no, if you read the Gita, the Sanskrit shlokas, there is no slave that I am the only divine. My name by which I am Sri Krishna is the only way. It is not that. There's no exclusive stress on this one form of his human birth. There is a sense that the avatar comes from yuge, comes from birth to birth, from form to form, from name to name, from age to age. So that is so important and is stressed in the Gita. And that is what gives it a sense of eternality, if you can call it, and universality. For the avatar here, though he is manifest in the name and form of Krishna, lays no exclusive stress on this one form of his human birth, but on that which it represents. What does it represent? The divine, the Purushottam, of whom all avatars, all Godheads worshipped by men are the figures, the way declared, can reach the real knowledge and the real liberation, but it is one that is inclusive of all paths and not exclusive. For the divine takes up into his universality all avatars, and all teachings, and all dharmas. The Gita lays stress upon the struggle of which the world is the theatre in its two aspects, the inner struggle and the outer battle. We'll take this up next time. Any questions, comments, illuminations? One page left, okay. So do you want me to finish it? What is the time? Sorry? Okay. What does everyone feel? Shall we finish it? You all have the time? Yeah, but it's not the page and a half. It's the fullness of the meaning and the text, And it's a new thought, so I didn't want to jump to that. I just wanted us to be with this and to assimilate what we have had read, to allow the vibration of what we have just been exposed to, and just let that sink in, and then maybe we'll finish the next thought next time. So I was so full that I said I have no space now in my brain. I don't know about anyone else. Okay.
Amita,
Yeah.
I had a thought. Please tell me if I'm on the right thinking. Is that when Sri Krishna talks about this line towards the end, by which man can reach the real knowledge and the real liberation. So here, the liberation I'm seeing as freedom from being exclusive. We
Yes,
think
freedom from the ego, because the ego is what creates exclusiveness and division, and the ego
yeah,
is what separates man from the divine and man from man.
correct. And also, when we look at the avatars, we see Buddha, Christ, Krishna, then we think of them as exclusive to that time and that particular race. But here, Sri Krishna seems to be telling us that these avatars are independent and above
Yes,
time and race. So that
yes.
liberation in thought and
Hmm.
perception is what I figured he was hinting at
Yes,
when he says, I'm
yes. Very.
not just the avatar of this age and this
Hmm.
country and this
Hmm.
circumstance, but
Hmm.
the avatar is universal. Uh,
Yes, yes.
so that
No,
is
it's
the
very good
liberation.
that you pointed that out. Yes, it's absolutely true. That is what he's saying here, that it's not set in a particular time and place, it's universal.
Thank you.
So, uh, it's a liberation from also, I suppose, the narrowness of our thought and mind, mental conceptions that want to always box in things.
Even in a
Any other?
sangha, even in a
Yeah,
sangha or a community, we tend to think, like my community is different, the sangha is different, our aims
mm,
and goals are different. Um,
yeah. A sense of superiority comes in, or
yeah,
division.
yeah. The more we go into it, the more we can see how much work needs to be done, at least for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, no, no. All of us. And the mind is, that's the nature of the mind, to tend to divide, tends to, it's the nature of the beast. It's only the soul and the psychic being that unites.
If you see it in certain religions also, and I think this is a touchstone. When they say that these are the chosen people, or this is the chosen, as soon as they you see that this is a set of chosen people.
Yes.
Like for example, with Jews, so they think they are chosen ones of that Moses.
Yes.
As soon as you say that I am the chosen one,
Yeah.
you are actually excluded. So some religions have it in their
Yeah, it's in their DNA.
perception.
Right. Okay, so we end with a minute of concentration. So today is the festival of Makar Sankranti in India, festival that is celebrated here. So wishing you all a very happy Makar Sankranti. So we start today. We will start from page 173 at the end, the last paragraph. In the teaching of the Gita, which is more Catholic and complex. Yes, once found it. In the teaching of the Gita, which is the divine birth and divine works, in that chapter, about 2.5 pages down. In the teaching of the Gita, which is more Catholic and complex than other specialized teachings and disciplines, these things assume a larger meaning. For the unity here is the all-embracing Vedantic unity, by which the soul sees all in itself and in itself in all, and makes itself one with all beings. The Dharma is therefore the taking up of all human relations into a higher divine meaning, starting from the established ethical, social, and religious rule which binds together the whole community in which the God seeker lives. It lifts it up by informing it with the Brahmic consciousness. So, starting from, we establish the ethical, social, and religious rule which binds the whole community in which the God seeker live. It lifts it up by informing it with the Brahmic consciousness. The law it gives is the law of oneness, of equality, of liberated, desireless, God governed action, of God knowledge and self knowledge, enlightening and drawing to itself all the nature and all the action, drawing it towards divine being and divine consciousness, and of God love as the supreme power and crown of the knowledge and the action. The idea of companionship and mutual aid in God love and God seeking, which is at the basis of the idea of the Sangha or divine fellowship. So the idea of the Sangha and divine fellowship, the basis of this idea is the idea of companionship, because man, finds it difficult to live wholly and totally alone, and mutual aid, helping each other, but in God love and God seeking. The seeking is towards the divine, which is at the base of the idea of the Sangha or divine fellowship, is brought in when the Gita speaks of the seeking of God through love and adoration. But the real Sangha of this teaching is all humanity. So it is not just a sect or a small group exclusively, but the real Sangha of the Gita is the idea that there is the consciousness of the one in all and the all in one, which is the cosmic consciousness of the whole world, that all of humanity is part of the divine and in the divine as much as oneself. So this is the, unlike the Buddhist Sangha or the Christian church or, the Vaishnava uh, uh, Bhagavad Bhagavat, and so on, this is slightly different. So the Gita is very clear that it moves towards this kind of a sangha. Now, the idea of companionship and mutual aid in God love and God seeking, which is at the basis of the idea of the sangha or divine fellowship, is brought in when the Gita speaks of the seeking of God through love and adoration. But the real sangha of this teaching is all humanity. The whole world is moving towards this dharma, each man according to his capacity. It is my path that men follow in every way. So here you can hear the words spoken by the lips of Sri Krishna when he says, "It is my path that men follow in every way, in every religion, in every sect." And the God seeker, making himself one with all, making their joy and sorrow and all their life his own, the liberated made already one self with all beings, lives in the life of humanity, lives for the one self in humanity, for God in all beings, acts for Lok Sangraha, for the maintaining of all in their dharma and the dharma, for the maintenance of their growth in all its stages and in all its paths towards the divine. For the avatar here, though he is manifest in the name and form of Krishna, lays no exclusive stress on this one form of his human birth, but on that which it represents, the divine, the Purushottam, of whom all avatars are the human births, of whom all forms and names of the Godhead worshipped by men are the figures. So again, in the Gita, the avatar is not something that is only confined to the name and form of Krishna. That alone is the avatar. However, he lays no exclusive stress on this one form of his human birth, but on that which it represents. What does the human birth of the divine represent? It represents the divine, the Purushottama, of whom all avatars are the human births, of whom all forms and names of the Godhead worshipped by men are the figures. The way declared by Krishna here is indeed announced as the way by which man can reach the real knowledge and the real liberation. But it is one that is inclusive, but it is one that is inclusive of all paths and not exclusive. For the divine takes up into his universality all avatars and all teachings and all talents. So this inclusiveness, this lack of exclusion, this taking up into the universality all the avatars, past and present and future, and all the teachings and all the dharmas is the way of the Gita. And we spoke last time of the Sanatan Dharma. The Gita lays stress upon the struggle of which the world is the theatre in its two aspects. So the Gita lays stress upon the struggle. As you know, the Gita is enunciated at the battlefield, in the battlefield. So the Gita lays stress upon the struggle of which the world is the theatre. It's in its two aspects, the inner struggle and the outer battle, both very visible in the discourse with Arjuna. In the inner struggle, the enemies are within, in the individual, and the slaying of desire, ignorance, egoism is the victory. So this is the inner struggle. The enemies are within us, and the slaying of desire, ignorance, egoism is the victory. Please note the three particular words chosen here. The slaying of desire, ignorance, egoism is the victory. But there is an outer struggle between the powers of the dharma and the adharma in the human collectivity. The former is the dharma, is supported by the divine, the godlike nature in man, and by those who represent it or strive to realize it in human life. The latter, the adharmic, the latter by the titanic or demoniac, the asuric and rakshasic nature, whose head is a violent egoism, and by those who represent and strive to satisfy it. This is the war of the gods and titans, the symbol of which the old Indian literature is full. The struggle of the Mahabharata, of which Krishna is the central figure, being often represented in that image. The Pandavas who fight for the establishment of the kingdom of the Dharma are the sons of the gods, their powers in human form. So the powers of the sons of the gods in human form are the Pandavas. And Sri Krishna is a central figure represented in that image of the war of the gods and titans, who fight for the and so the Pandavas fight for the establishment of the kingdom of the Dharma, are the sons of gods and their powers in human form, and their adversaries are incarnations. Incarnations, you understand? In human form are incarnations of the titanic powers. They are asuras. So asuras are, they can also be incarnations, like you have a divine incarnation. You can even have a asuric incarnation. Do you know what that is? An asuric incarnation, a demoniac incarnation, a titanic incarnation. We have several examples of those in history. The recent ones, of course, the largest, biggest ones being Hitler and Stalin, etc. Okay, so this outer struggle, the Pandavas, okay, are the sons of gods, and the adversaries are incarnations of the titanic powers. They are asuras. This outer struggle too, the avatar comes to aid, directly or indirectly. Now, note this. The outer struggle too, the avatar comes to aid. It's not just the inner struggle. It is the outer struggle too that the avatar has taken birth. So each time the avatar has taken birth in history, you will always find the outer struggle. And the avatar helps either directly by going into the battle or indirectly from outside, as in the case of Sri Aurobindo and the mother during the World War. So this outer struggle too, the avatar comes to aid, directly or indirectly, to destroy the reign of the asuras, the evildoers, and in them depress the power they represent, and to restore the oppressed ideals of the Dharma. He comes to bring nearer the kingdom of heaven on earth in the collectivity, as well as to build the kingdom of heaven within in the individual human soul. So here in the case of Sri Krishna, very clearly the Dhritarashtra and his sons represented the most adharmic, most demoniac nature, and unless the Pandavas had come to fight and re-establish the law of dharma, the whole world would have been totally destroyed or gone to blazes. So, the inner fruit of the avatar's coming is gained, the inner fruit is gained by those who learn from it the true nature of the divine births and the divine works, and who, growing full of Him in their consciousness and taking refuge in Him with their whole being, Manumai Mam Shitaha, purified by the realizing force of their knowledge and delivered from the lower nature, attain to the divine being and divine nature. Madbhavan. So this is the inner fruit of the avatar's coming is gained only by those who learn from it, the true nature of the birth, and who grow full of the divine consciousness, full of Him in their consciousness, take refuge in Him with their whole being. Manomaya, Man, Upashritam. And then, realizing force of their knowledge and delivered from the lower nature, very important, the lower nature of desire, ignorance, and egoism, and attain to the divine being and divine nature. Madhva, the avatar comes to reveal the divine nature in man above this lower nature and to show what are the divine works, free, unegoistic, disinterested, impersonal, universal, full of the divine light, the divine and the divine love. He comes as the divine personality, which shall fill the consciousness of the human being and replace the limited egoistic personality. So our egoistic personality is replaced by this divine personality, which fills our consciousness and replaces the limited egoistic personality, so that it shall be liberated out of ego into infinity and universality, out of birth into immortality. He, the avatar, comes as the divine power and love which calls men to itself so that they may take refuge in that and no longer in the insufficiency of their human wills and the strife of their human fear, wrath, and passion, and liberated from all this unquiet and suffering, may live in the calm and bliss of the divine. Janma karma sami divyam ivam yo viti. I think this is the straight verse from the Gita. That's vataha yakta neti mam iti shojana. So he comes as the divine power. So this is the avatar who comes to reveal the divine nature in man, to free man from his lower nature, to show what are the divine works, free, unegoistic, disinterested, impersonal, universal, full of the divine light, divine power, and divine love. He comes as the divine personality which fills the consciousness of the human being and liberates us from the ego into infinity and universality, and out of birth into immortality. He comes as the divine power and love, which calls men to itself so that they may take refuge in that and no longer in the insufficiency of their human wills and strife, and the strife of their human fear, wrath, and passion, and liberated from all this unquiet and suffering, may live in the calm and bliss of the divine. Nor does it matter, essentially, in what form and name, nor does it matter, essentially, in what form the avatar comes, or what name, or putting forward, what aspect of the divine he comes, or in all ways, varying with their nature, men are following the path set to them by the divine, which will in the end lead them to him, and the aspect of him which suits their nature is that which they can best follow when he comes to lead them. So that's why it's very important to have this liberal Catholic view that the divine and the avatar can come in any form, with any nature, in any way. It depends on each one of us, our nature, which one we are more attracted to, and we follow that. But always lead to the divine. And for each human being, he is being led surely, either in whatever way towards that, however long it may take. So men are following the path set to them by the divine, which will in the end lead them to him, and the aspect of him which suits their nature is that which they can best follow when he comes to lead them. In whatever way men accept, love, and take joy in God, in that way God accepts, loves, and takes joy in man. Ye yatha mam pradyante tam tathaiva bhajamyam.